mobile-first game design for African audiences.
Good afternoon, Sigma. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Oliver de Bono. I am the founder at Quantum Gaming, a platform operating in the remote gaming space. I am today working alongside some industry veterans to give you guys a little bit of insight into the African market. Now, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. Quick introductions so we can just jump into this very interesting subject. I'll start with you, Ramon.
Fantastic. So I'm Ramon Glieneke, CEO of Alea. We are a leading aggregator, and we are expanding quite a lot here in Africa over the last couple of years.
Greetings to one and all. I'm Simon Munsamy, Managing Director for Playtech. Been in the industry for 19 years. I'm hoping to share some insights with you guys and learn from my industry colleagues as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ayofemi from Sharks Evolution Studios, Africa's first iGaming studio. Thank you.
Fantastic. So look, I want to jump straight into this one because it's a really interesting subject, especially for an operator and a platform such as myself. Ramon, we were just talking off stage about the differences in the African market. Now, you guys operate in a number of markets. Let's break it down. What is the essential difference? We know that Africa is a 99% mobile market, which does actually have an impact on the products you are pushing to the market, along with certain technical requirements. What can you tell us? What really separates the African market from the rest of the world?
Absolutely. I mean, we are operating mostly in Europe, Latin, North America, and Africa, and we see big differences in the Africa market. When we say Africa is mobile first, I would say Africa is mobile only, meaning that 99% it's just the 1% residual, it doesn't even count. And this has really a big impact on what we are doing as an aggregator, because then we don't have the name of the players, but we know the market. We are now present in 15 markets. We are 170 game providers integrated with us. We are growing in the market. And what is our job for operators, but also for game providers, because we're just in the middle, it's to find the nice spot where we can push the right content at the right moment for the right operator. Here I would say that also, this is a really Western point of view that we talk about Africa like a country. Yeah. We operate in 15 countries. Africa is 54 countries. So it's a completely different approach, but it's really Western European. So going back to your question is that when we entered the African market, we did a lot of analysis because the technicality of the limitation that we have on the mobile devices is really important. One, I want to share a couple of insights because that's what we did. I mean, we call ourselves a data-driven game aggregator, even in the analysis that we do, because then we can push the right content. Over every 5 mobile phones that are purchased and used in iGaming in Africa, 4 of them are under $200. 90% of these 4, it's under $100. So the technology that players are using are really different, and they are looking for some kind of content that has a speed load to prepare and to be played. So this is a key factor, because when we are pushing the content, and we talk a lot with game provider about it, and you guys can give a lot of insight about it, the content that is working in Europe, for example, North America, or sometimes even Latin, it's completely different. I mean, what the players are looking for is something that is really has a quick load in terms of seconds. Also, the number of sessions that the players are using for playing iGames in the casino, it's really 50% higher. That's what we see in other countries. This is completely our data. And consider that the last month, I was checking before this conference and the panel, we had over 1.5 million players using our games in the African market, and we see the huge difference between this African market, LATAM, and in Europe. So the content that we are promoting and the content that we want, and we see that it's working, is something that is light. No wonder Crash games are the ones that are performing the better. They have a huge margin and a huge percentage of the total games, because the behavior of the player is completely different, and this is really related to the technology and the device that they're using.
Fantastic. I mean, look, this is, the age-old saying, necessity is the mother of creation. And if you've got a market that essentially dictates light games, fast games, but you said something interesting, I didn't know this, that the active sessions are greater in Africa. This obviously puts a strain technology-wise, because you need to go lighter and expect more.
Correct. I mean, we see the 50% more session that we see in on mobiles in Africa versus other market. I mean, this has a direct impact. We see that they come more often, they have the accessibility, they have the device limitation. So this is a perfect mix for a specific kind of product, and game providers should push more. We are in the middle, we push the game providers on giving the right content for the African market, and we see that what is working in Africa, and this is kind of general, then we can talk about the continent here, it's not the same that working in Europe. I mean, we also have this Western mentality when we talk about Africa, but also when we talk about the content that we think should work. And then with our data that we see, the game provider and the content of each game provider that is working in Africa, it's completely different from what we see in other destinations. And that's where we push also because we are business partner with the casino. And the more they grow, the more we grow. And that's what's our business kind of intelligence that we share with our clients.
It's very interesting. I mean, essentially, the aggregator, you want to support your operators. The more they do, the more you do. But Simon, I want to switch over to you. Obviously, coming from a brand like Playtech, a dominating game provider within the market, when you're looking at the African market, are you looking at adapting your current games, or do you feel that there are certain segments of games that need to be created particularly for this market?
Yeah, I think we obviously fortunate because creating content is what we do, that's what we specialize in. But when we look at the market, to Ramon's point, Africa is obviously a very diverse differentiations. Like countries can share a border, but not necessarily the same interest. So as much as we have different product verticals, aligning it to the African market is obviously important. And it could be simple things, We look at even something like a minimum bet. We think €1 or 1 cent to the euro is acceptable. But when you convert that to shillings in Tanzania or naira in Nigeria, it actually doesn't conform to the normalities of what's the minimum bet in that market or that said market. So you don't necessarily speak to the audience because they're so used to having a minimum bet in their local currency, and then your system doesn't conform to that because even at 1 cent to the euro, being a European supply coming in, it's still too high because we obviously speak to the active sessions or the longer end users consume and engage with the content. So certainly when we look at our content, we understand that there's content that will work in the market, there's content that just requires minor tweaks to work in the market, and there's content that needs to be custom and bespoke to that said country, because we've seen in the past, we do multiple verticals, whereas like live casinos rich on data and streaming, it's not necessarily adaptable in certain markets, and in other markets it's probably there's a little bit more uptake because it's a little bit more mature as an African country. And then we look at our instant gratification and RNG games, and we find that it's more consumed by consumers only on the basis that we're bringing some level of premium quality games, but we're bringing it in a way and we're serving it and rendering it in a way that actually speaks to their end consumer. Obviously, it's very open dialogue. We obviously speak to the licenses on the ground, we understand the pain points, and the fact that we are a tech company, we're in a position to adapt and quickly implement solutions that actually aligns with their strategies to help them grow as a business.
Fantastic. I mean, again, it is about knowing your market, but I think essentially it's like the chicken and the egg, right? And that's what's leading to my next question. Ayofemi, I want to ask you this one. Crash games have exploded in the African market. Why? What is leading that? Obviously, we're seeing fast, light, but is it simply a market where crash games are going to remain dominant? What other products are we seeing that are increasing in market share here?
Okay, for crash games, right, a couple things. I think some of the things that Ramon and Simon made mention of, there's the quickness, number of repeat sessions that you can have, right? That helps people to also, play multiple times, and it's kind of like more comfortable. You'll notice that people prefer something that is easy as well. So crash games dominated the market, particularly in Africa, because it was easy, right? You didn't need to really understand. You don't need to go to how to play or read through a manual, right? All you need to do is just click, get your result immediately, right? And then the next session starts in a couple seconds, maybe 5-7 seconds. Then you go ahead, you do the repeating. So for us as a provider, we make instant games, and we also have that same pattern, right? And the future of development also across most parts of Africa are going towards that side. Everybody wants something that is easy to, understand. You can play many times as often as possible. You don't need anybody to walk you through, right? So you would see that many games that are also becoming more popular coming into the market as well, or other studios, making something similar, leaning towards that same direction, because that's what like most Africans want, right? But gradually, in the market, the players are also beginning to expand, try new things, right? Which is also, helping with other aspects of other kind of games that are also coming into the market to also gain popularity. But Crash games really moved across the wave because of the simplicity, the social interaction as well. You can see while you're placing a bet as well, you can see other people also, cashing out, playing. So you're like all vibed up, trying to like relate with it as well. So speed, number of repeat sessions that you can play as well, social interactions, those are the things that kind of, helped it to really excel.
I really like what you mentioned there, actually. I have to say, it's not something I had thought of, but it's the simplicity. You don't need someone to guide you on the dynamics of certain slot games. This is actually what's fundamentally taking over in this market. It is the simplicity. You click bet, stop, which essentially I think is one of the reasons why the market is exploding with Crash games. But I want to touch on something else now. This is a great baseline for us too. I know we don't have too much time, and this is quite a big conversation. But Ramon, you mentioned recommendations. I want to give the audience a little bit of information. Like, tell us what works. You're working in 15 countries across Africa. You might say it's Aviator in this particular market and these particular games in another. Give us some prime examples of the stronger markets and which games work there.
Okay, absolutely. I mean, here we have two different approach. I mean, we have the approach of the Africa market. So Crash games are the ones that are working the best, and just adding on the conversation. And there's an additional thing that we see that's why Crash games are working in Africa. And this is cross Africa. This I can say, this is working in Africa because we see the same tendency and the same pattern across the 15 countries. It's technological, it's fast. I was mentioning before the number of sessions that they have. But there's another thing that in Africa, it's quite different from the other continent. The young population. I mean, Africa is a young continent. And young population, they love Crash games. This is where they actually, most of the players that they are entering iGaming, in Africa, they enter through Crash games. That's why the popularity did. We have Stripe, that is Aviator, of course, that is quite big. We have Jetix, for example, Smartsoft. Now, I was talking, and the guys that also won an award yesterday, the Avion, which is also a Spanish name, so perfect match for us. So we see this tendency on this part. What are the things, and then this is the kind of local approach that I would say that there are other game providers that I'm entering here. What we also see is, since we have a global overview about the markets and we see patterns, we dedicate, and sorry to be boring, a lot of time in analyzing data and see cross-partners. Sometimes or most of the time what we see is something that worked in a specific continent may work in another one. And a quick example is what is working in LATAM, for example, because we see the same pattern, young population, Brazil, for example, or other LATAM countries that we see that some game providers that are working games, or some games that are working there, we try to push in Africa, and it was a big success story. I'm talking about...
Such as?
Tada, for example, that for us became one of the main one that was performing really good in LATAM, and then started to perform in all the country. I mean, we see the same partner. The partner. We see that the spending per user per country varies a lot. There are East Africa, Western Africa, South Africa, North Africa. They are quite different in terms of spending, but we see a generic pattern of something that is working because the whole continent has some ground bases that help us in making more informed decisions. That's what we're doing, and that's analyzing the data, what we do. Tada is a good example. We were one of the first ones to introduce Tada in the markets because we saw that it was performing really good with the same pattern of data and players that we use there in LATAM. We push them, and for us, it's one of the biggest one at the moment. Then, of course, the usual suspect that are Stripe that I was mentioning, and Smartsoft and Crash Games and everything. But we also want to be, as an aggregator, a business consultant that I was mentioned before, because through data we can make informed decision, and we want to share this with the operator we work with.
Fantastic. Look, that's really interesting. I mean, it is test case, right? You need to test the product, see if it works, you see similar patterns, and then obviously you need to A/B test. Everything is about A/B testing, essentially.
Absolutely. And also, it varies according to the base of the players that each casino has. I mean, the targeting is not just about country. They are focusing more on volumes, a lot of spins. Some others, maybe they look also, apart from the technological part, on the volatility of the game, which is a really impact because they won't create a story. I mean, by betting, you can have a higher income, and volatility has a bigger impact on the players. So we analyze all this pattern, and we try to navigate into it for each country and each operator.
Very interesting. I want to just change gear a little bit. So obviously we're seeing a pattern here. We're seeing, a young population, mobile first, but there are technical requirements which we mentioned earlier. Simon, I want to shift to you on this one because I'm trying to understand, especially from my side, you've got certain games that do well globally. You want to bring those games to Africa, but there are certain, let's say, restrictions. There's, latency, different types of devices, different resolution. You can't always come in with the exact same product. Do you actually edit? Are there edits required for products that work internationally to prepare them for the African market?
Certainly. I think when you look at entering a market, obviously from our side we work in regulated markets. There's a framework as to how you want to approach the market. But when you enter that market with the content, we have thousands of games. It's not necessarily a case where we want to enter with thousands of games. We sell entertainment. We want to make sure the games that we offer to our licensees and they obviously offer to their clients brings a certain level of value where their clients have that level of entertainment and enjoyment when they're playing the games. No matter what the RTP is, the game has to offer that level of entertainment. So when we look at the technical challenges, there's obviously a lot of, fortunately, the way technology has advanced, there's a lot of useful tools that we can leverage off. When a game loads, for an example, it might load and you might take the big data payload at that point, but then you leverage off caching, you leverage off the fact that the logo won't change in the game. There's no need to recall the server for that type of information. It kind of optimizes for the end user's experience. It also is very much reliant on the end user as well. We've seen, and I like to use examples in Africa because no two countries are the same. You look at Kenya, for an example, where Opera Mini is a very popular browser. Yep. And then you look at Opera Mini is probably non-existent in South Africa, And in Opera Mini, there might be a consumer that has extreme data savings enabled. And the moment he does that, because he's conscious to his pockets, like your tech now is affected by that because none of your JavaScript on the front end works. So now you need to obviously make provisions in your software and in your solution where you recognize who is the consumer. Oh, it's coming from that browser. Oh, it's data savings enabled on Opera Mini. Therefore, you adjust within the rendering of the game, For an example, someone that's not on that configuration might have the fancy pot of gold with the coins just, exploding and all the exciting elements of animation. But for that consumer, it might just be like a nice fancy box that just says you've won, only because we don't want to interrupt his experience with broken sort of gameplay. So we have to obviously consider these type of things. It's no one case, it's not one solution or one glove fits all hands. But fortunately for us, we do it anyways because it's part of the experience we want to render to our licensees, which obviously gives their customers a good experience when it comes to, further honing in on some of the technical challenges. We obviously feel their pain and we have to conform. If you don't conform, then your chance of success is minimum to none.
So that's interesting. I mean, when we're customizing, when we're editing, could there be scenarios, let's remove this animation because it may affect the game negatively in a particular market. But obviously there needs to be certain decisions made not to impact what the game is designed about, right? Essentially, you've got a product, it's done well because of X. Yeah. At what point do you say, okay, it's no longer viable to send this game into the market?
Well, I think the key is to be bespoke and agile. So it's almost like you have the perfect solution, and at time of rendering the content, it adapts to the consumer. So we could be sitting next to each other, and you could be on the best smartphone device, the most sophisticated piece of software on the device, playing the same game as myself, who's on a mid to average smartphone with Opera Mini data savings enabled, and we both can play the same game, the same piece of code, the same software and the same game, but we, as the content provider, recognize that we need to give you the best possible experience, and because of the data that we obtain through the technologies we have adapted in creating the game, we will render you a game that, or will render you the game with the gameplay that's most adapted to suit your needs. So in that case, you would have the full bells and whistles because all the data that we've obtained from your device and your experience suggests that that will be the most immersive experience for yourself. Likewise, for me, there's no saying that my experience will be any much at a disadvantage. It'll just be more tailored to the fact of what will suit my needs, as you know, because when I'm playing the game, I still want to have that same level of engagement. I still want to continue with my session. I don't want to feel like something is wrong, you know. So you're giving the same message. It's just a case of, you know, speaking the language that's most adaptable or responsive to the end consumer.
It's really interesting because, again, yes, I mean, this is the kind of information that the audience is looking for, essentially. We know that there are requirements. We're beginning to understand why crash games work so well in the market. But Ayofemi, I want to touch a little bit on localization now. As a studio, obviously operating in this market, give us a couple of examples. We know that, you know, crash games are popular, but is that in every African state? I mean, we say Africa as one market. It's, as you said, 54 markets. It's, you know, there needs to be some level of localization. What other products can we see coming into the market?
Like I said earlier, right? Crash games are popular to a particular extent, but for certain markets as well, even in Africa, they might not be the most popular games, right? So, for instance, in Nigeria, where I come from, crash game is popular, but people are more inclined to football-related content, right? So, even while it's the rage of the moment in Eastern Africa, in Nigeria, people even run away from it, right? So they lean towards football. So we have this tradition of football, and that kind of extends to a couple of things. That's why you have like virtual football, very popular in Nigeria. People go all the way to their different retail stores to stand and just keep playing for hours, right? So different markets, different things apply. I think with launching games and thinking about the game that you want to create and the market you want to get into, you have to critically think about the people there, those that are going to be playing it, what kind of games do they prefer, right? What is the kind of culture they have, right? If you want to localize this particular game, what are the things you have to take into cognizance, right? For instance, with the crash game that we launched for Kenya, we have one specifically made for Kenya called Matatu, right? That one captures the local vehicles in Kenya, the environment of the game as well. You can see places for like CBD, different landmark areas that we imputed into the game, right, to make it more culturally relevant, right? We did the same thing also with Ethiopia, and then we have something similar for Nigeria, right? So different markets, different approaches, do your research. Sometimes you can try to test, right? Talk to the people there, you know, in the game, try to apply a bunch of things that will make each person excited, right? So for instance, when we did like a game in Kenya, like the Matatu game, for instance, we featured like one of their local vehicles called City Hopper, and people saw it and were like, oh, City Hopper, City Hopper. Like that was what, like, it was like a thing, right? So it really just confirmed like the, you know, your expectation about localization and how people actually get to see it, right? Just a little tweak, adding something that relates to them. For instance, our own kind of crash games feature like moving vehicles, like land-based moving vehicles, right? You want to really apply what is the, how do the average Kenyan interact on a daily basis with motion, right? So different things like that, you take it into cognizance for different games and different regions as well. So we do that for the football-based games. We do that for, you know, certain times when we also customize games for, you know, certain operators to also go into the market with. We also adapt all of these different things to localize, give it a different feel. It could also come with sounds, right, as well. It could come with the layout. It could come with even just the name of the product, right? So you do your research, you go deep down, talk to the people, interact, and then you can get the kind of results that you want to get out of it.
Fantastic. I mean, that's quite interesting, which actually kind of reverts back to aggregators because, you know, if you're looking at a market the size of the African market and you're going to take so many snippets from what we discussed today, the average player session is 50%, well, longer, more sessions, right? Take that combined with the size of the market. As an aggregator, how do you tailor for so many markets?
I mean, this is data. That's why we call ourselves a data-driven game aggregator, because we spend a lot of time on analyzing the data. We do two kinds of analysis, actually. That's, for a reason, it's the second year that we are the main sponsor here at Sigma Africa, because it's a market that is growing, but we saw also the potential. So we do an internal analysis to understand a little bit the patterns that I was mentioning before in terms of what is working, what is not working, how we can localize. We make suggestions to the operator, but we also make suggestions for the game provider. creating a specific content adapted to the African market is a key aspect for a game provider to grow in the market. And then we do the external analysis as well. So we merge the data from outside to inside. Meaning we analyze the market potential. That's why we are here again. And we saw a big gap between the internet penetration, for example, and the mobile use. I mean, there's still a lot of huge possibility for the market to grow. Some reports mention that in 5 years, the total GGR, the total volume will double in just 5 years. Where do you see that nowadays in the market? And then where it comes, our tactical part in Alea, that we analyze the data, say, okay, how we can close the gap, what we can make it work, which is the preference of the players, and merging all this data from outside and inside is where, as an aggregator, we are pushing the content for the casino and also for the game provider, because we recommend also to game providers how to adapt themselves.
See, that's really interesting again, because we're only scratching the surface. Let's be fair. We're not going to analyze the African market today on stage, but you guys have given us amazing insight. I know our time's up, but I want to continue just because a couple of these questions actually resonate with some of the items you guys mentioned earlier. Simon, I want to throw this one at you. If you had to choose to focus speed or graphics in the African market?
I would go with speed.
Speed.
Undoubtedly so. Only because the instant gratification element of content is the biggest uptake in the market. We spoke about Crash. What's the biggest thing with Crash? Crash is a game of chance. It's not a game of skill. Games of skill generally, like blackjack or poker, you're thinking, there's a level of probability, whereas with games of chance, like slots and Crash, you generally keep churning, and that's what consumers want. If that plane, jet, or whatever the graphics are, the gameplay still remains the same. It's the speed element, it's the excitement of possibly winning with very little effort, if you want to call it. To play a Crash game, it's purely chance. No one can tell you that there's some level of skill involved. It's a different story if you want to play poker, for an example, where someone says, oh, there's some skill based on the hand, I got a certain probability of winning. So when we're creating content, it's about rendering products from a speed perspective. That doesn't necessarily mean that we neglect the graphics and the design, because something has to look exciting. It has to be appealing. So, finding the balance is important, but it's pointless showing all these fancy bells and whistles, but when you open the door, it takes forever to open. We need to make sure that we find the right balance. Obviously, we're conscious for time, but yeah, we could speak about these things for a very long time, and we can go into very granular detail, but the long and short of it is definitely speed takes precedence.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it's a simplicity. I don't want to think, I want to bet, what happens, happens, which is essentially what we're saying is the prime focus of the local, well, let's say the African market. We don't use the word local because we are talking about such a large region. I know we're out of time, but Ayofemi, I just want to touch on one thing because you mentioned this before and it's great. How do you design tutorials for players? Is it worth it? Because you touched on the simplicity, the guidance of it. Is it worth creating something more complicated and adding a tutorial, or do you think the players would just overlook it?
You need to have a tutorial, right? I remember in the first days when we started, we didn't have a tutorial, right? And we just believed that it's easy, it's direct, but the market, there's still so many people coming into the market on a daily basis. In as much as Crash is popular, there's still some people who have still not tried Crash, right? So, and the very first time they want to try it, they don't necessarily have a friend that's going to tell them, okay, this is how, click a bet, and somebody who's just maybe playing maybe a sports book, right? Plays the bet on maybe the weekend games, and it's just like, okay, what else can I do? Goes to the casino section and looks around and just says, okay, let me try a game for the first time, right? There should be a way for them to learn a couple things. It might not be much, right? It might just be something written somewhere in your game where they could just click the hamburger menu, find how to play, just really quickly read and understand, right? So it's essential. I think even aggregators now want you to be able to provide that in your game such that it's easy for them and for players to, understand it. It's nothing complicated. I don't think it takes even more than a kilobytes to add, that kind of function. You're not doing a video teaching them how to play, just written content. It could just be something that just goes, when they open the game, it tells them, okay, this is how to do this, this is this, Or you add it to a page in the hamburger menu that just explains it. Simple and short.
That's really interesting because, you know, having also been in the market for 20 years, sometimes I go into a slot game and I see those long tutorials you need to click through. I don't think anybody actually reads them. It's like click, 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 immediately. Look, this is a big subject. There's a lot more to it. I actually really enjoyed it because I actually heard things that I hadn't heard before. And you made a very good point, you know, about the tutorials. And I really like this subject. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I really want to say thank you. Let's give a warm hand to our panelists for their insight. Thank you very much. And I do suggest, if you are interested in the market, these are the gentlemen that you need to pull aside when they come off stage if you want to learn more about the trends in Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sigma.
Thank you.